conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for showing up and showing a commitment to the legacy of Dr. King by being with us today. Historically, UCSF has held a space in honor of the legacy of Dr. King by engaging in a number of different campus and community events. And so despite being in shelter in place and being remote for many of us, we still want to make sure that we bring that programming to our community. And so we have invited a wonderful range of community panelists to share more about their insights about the legacy of Dr. King, the important work that they're doing in our communities. And UCSF as an organization, we do great work, but we don't do that work in isolation. And it is also our responsibility to uplift our community organizers and our community collaborators to recognize that great work happens across the Bay Area, across the city, and that we have so much to learn from our partners as well. So I first want to just introduce our moderator and who is going to lead the rest of our session. Before I do that, I want to give us just a special thank you and acknowledgement to Melissa Bautista, the Assistant Director for the Multicultural Research Center, who organized this wonderful event and brought everyone together. And also want to give our acknowledgements to our wonderful ETS staff member, Dorothy Wang, who's handling all the details and logistics on the back end. If you have any questions related to the event, the recording, etc., Melissa will be posting those things in the chat, and we'll also be welcoming some questions from you all as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce you all to the amazing Dr. Tsahai Tafari, who has joined our UCSF community most recently in the last year, but has been a wonderful power and a great voice and an agent of change. So Dr. Tafari is the Director of Strategic Initiatives within the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, also known as CTSI here at UCSF. Earlier in her career, she worked for the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, building its research foundation and application review program. And she initiated a number of evidence-based and data-driven programs and improvement initiatives across the organizational mission. She's also led the expansion of the Community Health Worker Program and disseminated best practices regarding student self-reported health literacy outcomes related to career paths for program participants. Tsahai is also a member of the Black Caucus and actively took on leadership roles in that capacity. And as a part of creating an expansive platform here at UCSF, I want to make sure that we are sharing the stage and sharing the microphone with all of our wonderful and amazing contributors. So we're so glad to have Tsahai lead the panel, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Tsahai.
Thank you so much, Lamisha. Thanks for this opportunity. It really, truly is an honor and a privilege to be here in community and conversation with the leaders that'll be talking with us today. I want to just quickly do a brief preamble before we go into introductions. And I wanted to just note that today we're honoring the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by centering Black leaders and the work that they're doing in the continued struggle for Black liberation. And as we know, much of what the general public understands about Dr. King is focused on selective quotes from his various speeches, specifically the I Have a Dream speech in 1963. And his work is often framed as something that happened a very long time ago, when a lot of the people who supported and opposed his work are still with us. These are people in our community, these are people's parents and grandparents. It's really important to remember that this is recent and this is a current and ongoing struggle. There's also a misalignment of fact and fiction around what proportion of Americans actually supported King at the time. And also it's very similar to the disconnect we have today around what proportion of Americans actually support white supremacy and capitalism right now, right? So around 47% of voters, even higher among certain groups and much lower, of course, in the Black community, actively support white supremacy and capitalism. It's really important for us to realize that this is a current issue. We also have to remember that Dr. King was assassinated in 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. He was murdered for the work that he did, where he was supporting Black sanitation workers who were organizing after 2 employees had been crushed to death by a malfunctioning truck. It's really important, he was there striking for union recognition, for safe working conditions, and fair wages. So, while the narrative now around Dr. King is largely positive, the parallels between how he was received and how current movements are received are very stark. They're very similar. It's really important to remember that. And specifically around Black Lives Matter, which explicitly centers marginalized communities within the Black community and Black liberation movements. So it must be said that Dr. King was only 39 when he was murdered, very young, and that often is not clearly communicated, given we see these Black and white images of him in the Black and white film. He was young, he was an evolving leader, and his work was undergoing an interesting evolution at the time he was assassinated. And so, our fight for recognition of Black humanity and all its representations neither began with Dr. King nor ended when his life was violently ended. Okay, so today we're going to spend some time hearing directly from Black leaders of community-based organizations, members of our community, about the work that they're doing. And so I'm going to go into introductions now. First, I'd like to welcome Eli, who is an adventurous social butterfly working with Black trans-led initiatives, building community through love and learning, with a focus in creating tools for community survival and sustainability. He values connecting with Black trans people globally in a united fight for liberation. He's the communications director for the Transgender and Gender Variant Intersex Justice Project, based in San Francisco. Welcome, Eli. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Monique Lasar, known as Dr. Mo in the community. She's a proud San Francisco resident and prides herself on her community work. She's engaged with multiple things here at UCSF, so I won't go into all of them, but I will also mention that she's the executive director of the Rafiki Coalition, an agency focused on reducing health disparities and increasing wellness in San Francisco's Black community. She has over 20 years in higher education, clinical, and nonprofit experience, and believes that in order to create individual and community healing, that it's important to work on multiple levels of the system, from individuals, families, and groups, academic, training, research, advocacy, and policy. Welcome, Dr. Lasar. Next, I'd like to introduce Zach Norris, the executive director of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights and author of the book, We Keep Us Safe, Building Secure, Just, and Inclusive Communities. We'll have a link to how you can purchase Mr. Norris's book, just so you're aware. He also is a co-founder of Restore Oakland, a community advocacy and training center that will empower Bay Area community members to transform local economic and justice systems and make a safe and secure future possible for them and for their families. He's also co-founder of Justice for Our Families, a national alliance of family-driven organizations working to end our nation's youth incarceration epidemic. Welcome, Zach. And last but not least, we've got Kai Peterson, who is a trans advocate from South Georgia, who was incarcerated for self-defense. During his incarceration, he fought for trans prisoners' rights to medical care. In 2017, Kai co-founded Freedom Overground, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that supports trans and gender nonconforming incarcerated community, the transgender and gender nonconforming incarcerated community. Today, he shares his story of courage and perseverance with the TGNC communities across the country. To book Kai for an event, contact media at freedomoverground.org. We'll also have that link along with our recording and Zach's book and a link for purchase at the end. So I'd now like to turn this over to you so we can really hear more from you. I'd like to just go around. I'm going to start with Eli and then go to Dr. LeSarre, then Zach, then Kai. Could you just tell us a little bit about what your organizations are doing regionally, nationally, internationally, and how you see that fitting in with Dr. King's legacy? Eli?
Hey, what's up, y'all? So Eli, pronouns he, they. So let's say MLK Jr.'s work was rooted in resistance to violence, and it was about freedom of people from oppression. And TGIJP works in collaboration with others to forge a culture of resistance, resilience, to strengthen us in the fight for freedom against human rights abuses, imprisonment, police violence, racism, poverty, and societal pressures. So at TGIJP, we seek to create a world rooted in self-determination, freedom of expression, and gender justice. And our ultimate mission is to challenge and end human rights abuses committed against Black trans people inside California prisons, jail detention centers, and beyond. So pretty much, just continuing off the work that he did, a freedom fighter, and that's what we do at TGIJP. The organization has various programs that we provide. For example, to speak to like modern day, we have a legal team that got people that are currently incarcerated the materials that they need to receive their stimulus if they were able to get that. So people that are incarcerated were able to receive that as well, because we have a team that got those materials to them. And then as far as current formerly incarcerated goes, we have programs in place that provide services for when people come home. The goal is to provide them with like an income, to provide them with like housing. And we'll go into that a little later because COVID has shifted like our work. But, on a national level, TGIJP has a program called Black Girls Rules, which Kai, that's how come Kai is here, because he had a chance to engage in that. Black Girls Rules is a convening that originally started off for Black trans women from various regions, different leaders to come together to pretty much just strategize on national politic that we needed to get Black trans people free. Talk about what happens in our local areas so we could come together to come up with what we need nationally. And now it's like shifted to beyond, like internationally. BGR exists. It happens once a year. And last year before COVID, it was 65 Black trans leaders from all over. And the main focus is the South and the Midwest. The goal is to reach the marginalized. We have major Black trans communities in New York, major Black trans communities, in Atlanta, right? But that does not mean that they're receiving the same resources. So BGR kind of exists for us to leverage out our resources across Black trans led organizations nationally. And yeah, I'll keep it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Dr. LeSarre?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tsahai. I first wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement that I'm here in Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco, California, which is unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land. I wondered if somebody could, maybe Melissa could put in the chat if you are on the land acknowledgement, just to acknowledge what the land that you're on in this country. To honor the land, the people of the land, that we are guests on this land, we have a responsibility to this land, and that often we are missing our relatives, our indigenous relatives in this conversation, and many of us have that lineage as well, but we also really want to acknowledge where they're from and this land that we're on today. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Rafiki. I'm timing myself, don't worry, Tsahai, but I wanted to divert a little bit to just tell you a little bit about this moment in time and to invite you just to take a breath. This moment in time is a unique time in this country's history where we are about to have a Black and South Asian woman and Black and South Asian in the White House. And it is such an amazing moment. But we also have had so many different women and Indigenous women and Black women and women of color all over the country. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as much supremacy as there is, that Tsahai that you mentioned, there is also hope, and that we are also moving, and that we pray and we move our feet at the same time. So I wanted to invite everybody just to take a breath and breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. One more, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And just getting here, getting present in this moment together. I'm seeing Kai's beautiful face and saying, happy birthday, Kai. Happy birthday to you. you know, we don't get to, you know, many of us that are in this struggle, we don't even celebrate. I was on a panel on my birthday too, so we don't even get to celebrate our birthdays. And I want to also encourage us at Rafiki. What we do is we really work to bring village, to bring multi generations. We come from the tradition of Black Coalition on AIDS, and we started as a grassroots organization. And we have been thriving now and surviving now for 34 years in San Francisco. More recently, we moved into wellness. And then most recently, we moved into COVID. So we are working and pushing and stretching and really working to provide testing in the community, to provide access now to information about the vaccine, to have really great conversation about the medical industry, and even with UCSF, pushing UCSF to acknowledge that UCSF and other industries have to earn their trust with communities. So we work on racial equity, health equity, housing, therapy, healing, bringing the village together, using cultural practices. You can visit our website and see we have a lot of things that you can tap into just to do self-care. So meditation and yoga and all of that type of thing, as well as find a therapist, get information about health access, get information about where to get tested, all those things. So I'm going to press pause now because there's so much going on. But I just want us to remember that one of the things that we do at Rafiki is to work to build bridges and bring people together from our heart and from our head. So much love, everybody. And by the way, what a phenomenal panel. I'm extremely humbled and I feel like, oh, I shouldn't even be here. Y'all are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, I know I can always count on you to really humanize things and to bring us back to our bodies. So thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Next up, I'd like to invite Zach Norris to tell us about his organization and how it carries on the legacy of Dr. King.
Thank you, Dr. Tafari, and happy birthday, Kai. Thank you also, Monique, for that land invocation. Um, I am Zach Norris, he, him pronouns, Executive Director at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. I think we continue in Dr. King's legacy because Dr. King was involved in the freedom movement. And I believe that Black people, brown people, poor people are still working for self-determination, still working to be free from oppression. We're named after Ella Baker, who was a brilliant Black woman, a leader in decades upon decades of struggle for freedom for all people inside the United States, but also around the world. And she believed in the power of everyday people to make change. So she organized with students, sharecroppers, just ordinary folks. And we try to build on her legacy by continuing to organize survivors of crime, formerly incarcerated folks, currently incarcerated folks, their family members, to advance what we call a books not bars, jobs not jails, healthcare and housing not handcuffs agenda. We are proud that in 2020, we were able to work with Assembly Member Ash Kalra, among others, to pass the Racial Justice Act, which gives people an opportunity to challenge bias in their sentencing here in the state of California, which should be the law of the land. If you can challenge bias in terms of housing and employment, you should certainly be able to challenge bias as it relates to incredibly long prison sentences. And we also, I am proud of some of the work we did in 2020 with Night Out for Safety and Liberation, where we are reframing how people understand safety to really grounded in our felt understanding of safety. What we know in our bodies makes us safe, which is relationship and community, access to food, clothes, and shelter, not, some surveillance state, not 23 new prisons in the state of California and just one new university from 1980 to now. That is not what makes us safe. And so that is work that we do each year in the first Tuesday of August to provide mutual aid and support within communities. And we do it in partnership with, some 30 organizations typically across the country who are also coming out to reclaim public safety in a public way. So that's a little bit about our work. It certainly doesn't, I'll touch on a little, maybe other aspects later, but thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. These are wonderful introductions, all three of you. And I also want to kick it to Kai now. Kai, wouldn't you tell us a little bit about your work and how you see it building on Dr. King's legacy as well?
Okay. Well, our mission at Freedom Overground is to improve the quality of life expectancy of the justices involved with the TG and NC community inside the prisons. Our focus is mostly on the Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So right now, currently, we're working on things like resource guides and just giving them the information, because the biggest problem today is not having all of the information that we need. Because if you don't know something, you can't make any changes. So providing people with that information and just giving them the support, because that's what's really needed right now. Also, we are helping as far as getting medical needs met, therapeutic needs, emotional things, because a lot of state facilities don't provide those things. And if you don't know the law and what your right is, it's not going to be provided. So our biggest thing right now is just supporting those people inside and giving them that information and whatever else support we can give to them. And that way we can empower them. And, you know, and the other thing is, it's trying to help before they get to the prison systems and also helping them when they're out. So that's our focus as of right now. And I think it, you know, goes along with his work, because it's all really about freedom. And to be honest, freedom is something, this is just my personal opinion, it's not, nobody else owns it, so I shouldn't have to fight for it. But in this country, we have to fight for it because it's not so free. So that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you so much, Kai. Yeah, I'm hearing some really important themes here. Freedom, what we call safety, resources for our community, so physical and mental health support. I'm hearing a lot of all of these. I'm hearing the intersections between all of the work that all of you described. And so I'm gonna shift slightly, but we'll come back to a lot of those themes in a moment. One of the questions that we discussed, so I want to make sure I get to it quickly, which is, you know, what did you learn about Dr. King as a child, and how did that evolve over time? I'd love to hear from you, and if you want to connect it to your work, however you want to frame that would be great. But you know, we know that there's often some disconnects around how we learn around Dr. King, and so I'd love to hear your perspectives on that. I'm going to go to Monique because she looks like she's ready.
I wasn't really Tsahai, but I'll take it. I'll just say that the thing that I remember the most is "I Have a Dream," the speech. And I remember living in Alabama, I think at the time that I heard it, and we had this amazing literature teacher, and she would play Langston audio on a record player, for y'all who don't remember those days. On a record player, she would play the MLK "I Have a Dream" speech, and she would play Langston Hughes' Landlord. You know, she would play his, I can't remember it right now, or otherwise I'd recite it. But they're these amazing poems. And I remember hearing the "I Have a Dream" speech, and just the cadence of his voice, understanding that he died for what he believed in. I may not get there with you. And in that moment, it makes me think a lot about today and what we sacrifice for our work. You know, like a lot of us, I mean, I'm listening to Zach and I'm like, oh my God, 3 organizations to co-found. And then I'm looking at my own, you know, most of what you didn't even say about what I do. And I'm thinking, yeah, we give our lives to this. We give our lives to it because we love it and we love our people. And also that we can't rest with injustice, I think. And I think that that's what connects to me the most, is I cannot rest with injustice. I cannot rest with the privileges that I have when others are hungry, when others don't have. and when people are in pain. And I guess that's where I am today with it. And I know you're seeing me tearful, which
Being human.
which many of you are used to seeing me, but this is just where I am this year. It's been a hard year, and sheltering in place is hard. So we are still, if you live by yourself, which I do, I haven't had a hug in, since Christmas. So, these are hard days. And so we have to lift ourselves up with the love, and we have to lift ourselves up with the work that we do. And so that's what I remember about Dr. King. And that's what I give my life to every day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. LeSarre, for your work. Appreciate you hosting me at some of those amazing health coalition spaces that you've had in San Francisco. And what a joy and an honor and a blessing those were to see Black folks coming together to talk about health and wellness and to live it out in practice. So just want to appreciate you. And to answer the question, I was probably at St. Pascal's Baylon. I went to Catholic school, speaking of privilege, light-skinned, African-American, mom's white, dad's Black, cisgender man. So I come to this work with a fair amount of privilege. I remember hearing about Dr. King, always as an individual, right? It was that sort of hero story that we tell in the United States, like he stood up for civil rights and then everything changed. Not really hearing about the context of the movement, the context of women's work in particular. I know Ella Baker sometimes would butt heads with Dr. King in a spirit of fellowship and trying to move the movement forward, but she believed in in movement-centered leaders rather than leader-centered movements. And I think there's a way in which we sort of elevate Dr. King without getting into, as you said, Dr. Tafari, the ways in which he was not very popular, that he was calling out the triple evils of racism, militarism, materialism, and that he was vilified because of that. And so, to see the contrast between how he was treated in the last years of his life and sort of how he's sort of put on this pedestal now, I think is just a reminder that we need to, just bring that full context, because the things, as you mentioned, that he was fighting for are still things that we are fighting for. And if we were more honest about what the full scope of his vision was and is, I think we would be further along that trajectory.
I just want to piggyback off of what Zach was saying. For me, it was like definitely the individualist thing. It was like this one guy did all these great things and it changed so much. And that was not realistic. I came to learn later. And then I think for me, one part in my household and I guess in where how my immediate family kind of brought it to me, I remember one of the main points was the nonviolence, and just stuck with the nonviolence. And now that I'm older and I've engaged in various political education, I've learned a lot more about the analysis behind it. I just remember kind of feeling like I learned a level of passiveness, oh, if I'm just nonviolent, no matter what happens, I just got to be nonviolent. It wasn't taught to me in this certain way. And I remember that I've always tied that to MLK. And then I know when I had gotten in the teenage years, early adulthood, I just remember at that point starting to learn a strong aversion at that point between Malcolm and Martin Luther King, and trying to figure out what was what and learning the difference, then going into learning the difference between the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement and all that other type of stuff. So yeah, for me, it was more about the nonviolence part and the individualist aspect are the 2 points that stuck for me.
Thank you. It's interesting how the direct action part of the nonviolence is often left off, and what we see all of you doing every day is the direct action. As you're pointing out, it wasn't about a passivity. Kai, what about you? What are your thoughts on what you learned about Dr. King and if and how that's evolved?
Okay, that's a really good question. The thing is, I really didn't learn much about Martin Luther King in school, which is crazy because over the weekend I done a lot of research. I looked at a lot of things on YouTube. My mom learned about it in school, but when I started school, they weren't teaching it, and I'm not really sure why. But then when I think about it, and I talk to some older people in my community, and it's like they don't teach us these things because they don't want us to grow. They don't want us to know where we come from and the road that other people have had to travel to get us to where we are today. And my grandfather said something to me because I asked him, I was like, why do you think, I was like, why do you think things are still the same way now that they were when you was growing up? And he told me, and I had to write it down because I couldn't believe it when he said it, but he was like, the thing is, this is how it's always been. Nothing is going to change. So his mindset from growing up is that white people are superior to us. And, we don't have any value. And that's not true because we're all equal. So now I'm learning that I can put in whatever I want to by studying, by learning, by asking questions, and I don't have to limit myself. So I can reach out to other people that may be more knowledgeable in areas that I'm not, because I want to learn. I want to learn more about his work and other great leaders, because it's so much that I can do to change things. It's just by sharing the knowledge that I'm learning with other people. And that will pretty much make things a little bit different, because if you change your mind, your way of thinking, and then you open your mind up and not be so closed-minded, things will change. You will look at things a totally different way. So that's just my perspective on things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All of you have wonderful answers to that question. And I want to build on that a little bit. And I think Zach might have actually alluded to this. What are the missing perspectives and misconceptions that are out there around Dr. King's work? And, how can we all work on addressing that and correcting that today?
I can jump in. One of the things that stands out for me as I was listening, we did a prep call for this call, and afterwards I did a little bit of listening to his Triple Evils speech. And, he's talking about science and in the advance of technology and where the United States is in that moment. And he talks about like having guided missiles, but misguided men. And I think one of the things that goes underappreciated is that he saw the fall of an empire before it happened. And I think we're living through the crumbling of white supremacy under its own weight. And I hope that we'll learn from the mistakes of the past where, the people who were the Confederates were allowed to regain positions of power, right? And now we see these folks who basically led an insurrection still remaining in positions of power. And that's one thing. The other thing I would say is that he had a structural analysis around racism, materialism, militarism. And so we still, as a nation, we're 8th per capita in terms of gross national product around the world, but we spend 53 cents of every federal dollar on the military. In California, we built 23 new prisons and just 1 new university from 1980 to now. The lion's share of every single city budget around the country goes to police departments. And so we, if you want to invoke, and I believe it's super important that we invoke the legacy of Indigenous people, because those founders said, as they were expanding across the country, that the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And that was a motto that was lived by white settlers as they expanded across the country. And now we have Democrat and Republican administrations alike that seem to believe that the only good government is a death government. And by that, I mean they will fund prisons and policing and militarism without fail. If recession after recession, those are the things that never go down in terms of funding, and the political power of those industries continues to rise. And and the things that actually keep us safe, that help sustain us, from healthcare to housing to good jobs, are the things that have been cut and slashed and burned. And so it shouldn't surprise us that in a nation where we have 25% of the world's incarcerated people, we produce 25% of the world's pollution, even though we only have 4% of the world's population. It shouldn't surprise us that now we have almost 25% of the world's COVID deaths, because we haven't built that public health infrastructure. We haven't built that safety infrastructure that would actually keep us safe. And those are things that he recognized decades ago that we're still grappling with.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because you kind of said all the stuff that I said out like I wanted to talk about. It pretty much like for me, the missing perspectives, and I think it's kind of almost not even as if it's missing, more it's like sanitized, and it's like it's sanitized, like anti-imperialism. When you think about that, you don't think Martin Luther King anti-imperialism. When you think Martin Luther King, you don't think anti-war. Yes, you think nonviolence, but you don't then think about the violence that the state enacts on other countries, the global south and stuff like that, and continues to underdevelop different places. So I think for me, that is one of the most important things that I think, like, people joke that MLK Day has become he didn't say that day. And like, I think it's like, it's great that we know that we're there, and we can take it a step forward to like create positions for people to, like Kai said, we don't know what everybody's introduction to, Martin Luther King is. Some people still, right? There's an assumption to be made that people learned about him when they were little, right? So they could be learning about him for the first time now. So what do we want to be introducing to people for those learning anything about him? And I think I love, Zach, what you brought up is like him, the women that were there behind him, combating with him, and continuing to strengthen his analysis around the things he did. And I think it would benefit all of us, specifically like the Black people that are in positions of leadership that are working towards liberation, to really, I also listened to that on the bike ride. I listened to it again, listen to some of these speeches, and really listen to what they say, and listen to how it ties to what we're doing now, and see the way he kind of Octavia Butler that, where, a parable of a sour, it just, we're living it right now. And it's like, yo, this is wild. So yeah, for me, it's just that importance of like political education. I think it goes back to that, like political popular education, getting people involved to listen to these speeches, to read through these things and pinpoint areas, and see how we can continue to build off of that. Because from what I've seen and heard, everybody's organization here is trying to like address those different things in real time now.
Thank you. Thank you for calling out Octavia Butler, whose Parable of the Sower was absolutely prescient. Monique, I think you were interested in speaking next.
Well, I just went to a whole nother place with that Parable of a Sower, but thank you for that, Eli. I wanted to just bring in Mahalia Jackson a little bit, and that I Have a Dream speech. Director Cheryl Davis of the Human Rights Commission in San Francisco told the story actually when she was here at our last summit, that Mahalia Jackson was the original hype man. So in that speech, he was losing it. He was losing the crowd. And she was like, hey, Martin, tell him about the dream. Tell him about the dream. Tell him about the dream, Martin. And so Mahalia Jackson was the hype man for that speech and really got him to that point. So all around, all the times that we're doing the things we do, there's always somebody else. We stand on the shoulders of so many. So I wanted to also say really quickly, sort of, everything Zach was saying about, sort of the colonial settler capitalism, hype. All of that was known. But the other thing is that he was also working with Malcolm X. They were also working together. There was a plan, there was a strategy. We were not doing this in isolation. People were organized, and and also to Eli's point about being passive. I don't know about you, but there is nothing passive when I want to smack somebody and I don't. Sitting in restorative justice circles and leading them myself with folks in San Quentin who had committed homicide, we really do learn, big time, what the difference is, how active and how healed you have to be in order to process your emotions and to have all that. So that's just the psychology part of me. But I wanted to say really quickly too that Christianity, whether it's a strategy, whether it's something that you believe in or not, whether it's your faith or your higher power, it was a specific strategy that our African ancestors in this country moved into for freedom. So Kai, you probably weren't taught this either, but folks in enslavement were not, I think you probably know, folks were not allowed to read, it was not legal. But what they started to realize is that if they started to use Christianity as something that they converted to, at least on the surface, right? Then the Bible would be something that they would be able to read. So it started to be the tool towards emancipation, right? Save the soul. So there's this whole other part, kill the only good Indian is a bad Indian, the only good end is a bad and is a dead end. All of those things, right, that folks said, but this was also the way that we also used Christianity. So Dr. King comes from a lineage of that. He comes from a whole people of using strategy and using religion and using spirituality to call forward emancipation and healing. So I just wanted to say that our African traditional healers, they were also under the skirt of the Christianity that so to speak, that MLK and Martin Luther King used, even if we're talking about Islam and we're talking about Christianity. So I never want to forget that our ancestors and that intergenerational trauma they went to, there also was a pattern of survival, a pattern of strength, and a pattern of coping that they utilized, and they were just smart. They were key strategists. So don't ever think that they weren't. They used all of these strategies for freedom and liberation.
Thank you, Monique. Kai, anything you want to add around, misconceptions or misperceptions based on what you understand of Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy?
It was one thing that I want to add. It was to build unity to all, to bring us together, not to tear us apart. And that's what's going on now. Everything is divided. We're divided as a people. And if we're all divided, we can't stand. So at some point, we're going to all have to open our eyes and be woke to what's going on around us. And going on in the world is just trying to divide us, trying to keep us not focused on what's actually going on. Because while we're focused on maybe one thing that's being said in the tweet by, let's see, well, today's the 19th. Well, he showed the president right now. But as we're listening to things by him, just that one little word, we're missing out on everything else. He's trying to slide a bill in because you're not paying attention to it. So the thing for us is to, together as a community and as a whole, to pull together and to stop fighting so much with each other and start fighting together for what we need. Because, and another thing is, the only way to know what we need is to actually ask questions. And I feel like that was something that he was on, by looking at the videos and the things that I have learned, that was something, he was trying to, pretty much bring the community together and not, wanting them separated or apart. So finding out what it is that's needed in the communities and helping to get that to them will be one of the things that will help to bring us together and to unite us instead of pulling us apart. This is the United States, so we should be united, not broken apart. So.
Thank you so much, Kai. Those are all wonderful, such great and deep answers. Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. King is often also known within the US for, just in context of the civil rights movement here, but he also made a lot of international contributions as well. And so I'd love to hear from you, what's the importance of maintaining a more international perspective, a global vision around, equity and justice? I'm going to let you call on yourselves. Looks like everyone's thinking, so just give it a moment.
I'll just start it off because it's just re-echoing what I just said. So that pretty much you know, so for example, to speak in real time, like the work that I do. So I do communications director with TGIJP, and I in March of 2020 had the chance to go to Cuba. It was my third time going to Cuba. And in this third chance going to Cuba, I actually became a member of LeSarre, which is the Red Burial Network, which is a network of Afro-Cubans on the island and off the island that work towards pretty much combating anti-Blackness. You know, there's a lot of ideas that Cuban had a revolution so that everything is okay, but we all know that that is not true. So there's still things that they're combating. It just looks a different way, and it is a different way. And I'm a part of a group of people that are here on Turtle Island that the goal is to build a mutually beneficial relationship with our family there in Cuba. So going there, I had the honor with my partner of going to 2 TLGBTQ cultural centers. I got to meet like Cuban trans girls. I didn't get to meet any of the guys, but you know, they did tell me about them. They were around, you know, having to do what they do. So next time I go, because I am going again, I'll be able to meet more people. I'm also able to organize trips for various people. So if anybody here that I built a relationship with said, that sounded so dope. I want to go to Cuba. I want to build that relationship. We don't pay attention to what the people in there say we can and can't do. We build relationships with our people. And I say all that to say that in the connection, I have now connected Black trans girls internationally to the Black trans girls here. And we're able to do that thing where we just share our experience, right? And compare, contrast, and try to get a better understanding. And also just move towards a place where we draw the connections, right? As Audre Lorde said, like we draw the connections of what's happening across seas, because, you know, when a lot of times when we talk about the liberation of Black people, right, we're talking about it from the lens of Black American people. And that is like a thing. I had a comrade at one point who they said recently, we were just talking about something happened where some young girls went to Bali or whatever, and they're like trying to tell people that, oh, you could live here, like not paying taxes and doing a whole bunch of other stuff. And, you know, they're young Black queer girls, but, you know, and the idea is, oh, we're colonized people, but it's like, we don't go and repeat that. So the importance of understanding the international struggle is because here in America, yes, we are Black colonized people here, but only one of our groups of Black people out of Black Americans, Black Caribbeans, and all of that live within the empire that's responsible for the ghettos in the Bronx, the Brooklyn, the ghettos in Compton, the ghettos in Kingston, and the ghettos in Lagos. So it's understanding that root. It goes back to what Kai says, who are we mad at and why are we mad at them? Because it's why when we go to these struggles, like we speak of the George Floyd, like, you know, uprisings, and we go to those struggles and we have our sisters like Iana who deal with having violence against them for their gender presentation and all of that. We are out here in the streets because we're fighting against state-sanctioned violence, and then we go and we perpetuate that same violence in the various ways within our own communities. So it's the importance of just knowing what the fight is for. And I think when you broaden your lens outside of the Black American scope, you can see that some of our greats, some of our favorites went across seas. And that's when things really kind of clicked for them, because it's not an oppressive Olympics thing. It's just to really look at, when we look at we look at what's happening in Israel, right? And then we look at who's also training, right, the police here. Oh, it's no coincidence that it's the police in Israel. So, you know, all these things tie together. So for me, that goes right back to the importance of having what's an international and trans international view of things in your politics.
A word. Thank you, Eli. Others? Any other comments?
Well, I'll just say, I mean, I think Eli just broke it down brilliantly, amazingly. So thank you. I'm like, ooh, I hope we're taping it. I guess we are. So that's a good thing. I just wanted to add that, you know, if we think about the sun never set on the Union Jack, you know, that's that saying, right? So there's this piece about colonization, about the healing that needs to happen. And when I visited in Jamaica, what I loved being in a Black country was that, I looked around and I must have been at the part of Jamaica where everybody has a gap tooth. So, I'm like, oh, and everybody's like, sister, sister, and it was so nice to be somewhere where people just, they didn't trip. And I saw beauty in their smile, and I could see beauty, right? I didn't see, everything, and everybody in my life was like, why don't you get braces, right? It's like, we can't, just to be your natural state, with whether it's your hair, your teeth, your skin, whatever that is. So I think having that experience, what I think happens for a lot of folks, when they come to, well, when we leave the United States, Black folks and Indigenous people of color leave the United States, you begin to understand that it becomes more of a class issue in other countries, that's presented very differently. But it doesn't mean that race and anti-Blackness isn't at the foundation of it. And so that all has to be part of the healing. And the other thing that I guess I'll say is, that when folks come here to this, to this colonized country, then they replicate the anti-Blackness as a way to belong. So there's something so deep about that, and that we must understand that we have to go nationally, but it was or internationally, but also that whatever that is, when it comes here, also has to understand that there's so much sickness here. And so, just as Eli said, we don't want to replicate that when we go somewhere else, but we also want to invite people as they come here to unpack and heal what they're bringing from wherever else they're coming from, but also to not then do the same damage here. That same Union Jack colonization, traumatization, anti-Blackness that is so deep that most people don't even seem to recognize what it is until you actually experience it every day. But anyway, I'll just leave it at that because there's so much more to say, but I know we don't have a ton of time.
Thank you so much. Zach and Kai, anything you'd like to add?
It was all said so brilliantly. I think I really appreciated Eli for talking about ghettos around the world. In that same speech, Dr. King calls the ghetto inside the United States a domestic colony of the United States. And I think that the importance of having an international perspective is partly so that we can see through the lie that is being told to us, because that lie comes in different facets. And I often call it the "he keeps us safe" lie. It's the lie of dictators. It's the lie that the architects of anxiety use, those who are trying to keep us anxious, fearful, afraid, and not trusting one another. And in that way, it is very much an abusive lie, because abusers say, don't trust the people who are closest to you. Don't trust your mother. Don't trust your girlfriend. Meanwhile, they are causing the harm inside the home. And similarly, this president, who is hopefully one day away from being out of that role, has been a mastermind in being an architect of anxiety. He has said, don't trust your neighbor around the block. Don't trust your neighbor at the border. Don't trust your neighbor in distant lands, even while he is causing all of the harm inside this country, and the apparatuses that he pushes forward, military, police, etc., are causing harm inside this country in ways that I think we can do better, that we know that we actually keep us safe, that we're strongest when we're united, as folks have said, and we're strongest when we're united with our siblings around the globe, right? And for me, a big part of the importance of having that international perspective is so that we as Black folks in this country don't fall for that anti-immigrant rhetoric, for example, right? And understand that when someone is coming from Honduras or coming from El Salvador, they have a history that has been shaped by the evils of militarism of the United States, and the economic injustice of our policy. So those are my thoughts on why it's important for us to kind of have an international perspective, and why I'm so grateful that Dr. King did, but also I think partly why he got so vilified was that he was willing to step outside of the bounds of what the powerful folks were saying. You know, you're going to be the civil rights leader. That's what you're supposed to be. And he was like, no, I believe in the freedom of every person.
Thank you, Zach. Y'all are very inspiring, and you're getting me getting ready to go do some more reading and research. Thank you, Kai. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off here. I want to give you an opportunity to chime in if there's more you'd like to add, please.
No, not to this question.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I do want to just pose one last question to all of you. And you know, originally we talked about this question more as, you know, directed towards specific communities or sub-communities. But I think I'm going to leave it up to you to decide, you know, what your parting thoughts would be to the people on this call who are listening to this conversation. You know, what do you want to say to folks in this moment, in this day, the day before inauguration, and the things that Zach was referring to in this time where we're seeking unity, as Kai pointed out, is an important part of how we all move forward together, and unity with ourselves, as Monique spoke to as well, right? Like, how do we connect with ourselves and extend that outside of ourselves into a broader community? So I'd like to just open it up as an open question for you. What do you want people to end this hour with, walk away with today, which is so many, because you've given us such a rich conversation. But what last thoughts would you like to share?
So I'm gonna just go because I really have appreciated this, and I have a hard stop at 4 because I have another meeting. I double booked myself. So I wanted to say that, like, what I want people to take home is that what we're building towards, all of these organizations are building towards our revolution. Now, we're all engaging in a revolutionary struggle. A revolutionary struggle is done through relationship building of colonized and oppressed people who are moving collectively to destroy capitalism, right? And that requires revolutions. It's organizing collectively to destroy colonialism, right? And then how does that happen, right? Long-term systematic organizing of oppressed people around the shared objective of liberation and destroying the current structure of society and putting something better in place. I want to emphasize putting something better in place, because a lot of times we talk about abolition, we talk about destroying, and I don't feel like there's enough talk about the building. And all these organizations here do the building. And then lastly, just revolutions are usually won. Like, if you look at history, they're won by a systematic transformation of society. So with that, I leave that with people because, you know, the goal is for us to continue to learn and continue to build and continue to grow. And that's what I would like to leave with people. Join an organization, right? Because I do, you know, organization work with TGIJP. I'm also a member of Black Alliance for Peace, and I'm waiting to finish getting my membership with the All African Revolutionary Party. Join yourself in organization, get yourself involved in some political education. That means even if you start a reading group with your friends, get a book, read around it, get out there, learn some names, go read some Black women. Don't only read Black men books, you know, read some Caribbean Black people stuff. You know, get international with it, get real strong in your analysis, get real strong about what representation means, right? And how it gives us any material change, right? I just want everybody to strengthen their analysis, because we will win the fight. We always win the fight. And that's what I want to leave out.
Thank you, Eli. So powerful. Who's next? Kai?
Okay, I'll just say something very quick. My whole thing was, I want people to know, we talk about defunding the police, we talk about decolonizing, we talk about a lot of things, but sometimes the things that we may start off one way, but it can be turned into a totally different way. The whole point of decolonizing is to tear down those oppressive systems. And when you tear down those systems, you're going to start creating programs, things for people in the community to do. But the problem that I'm noticing the most is that the oppressed is becoming the oppressor. Why is that happening, people? That's what I want to know. Why is that happening? Nobody has an answer for it. But that's what I want to leave the people with. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Great question.
I want to leave Dr. LeSarre with the last word, so I'm going to go next, if that's okay.
course.
I really appreciated being a part of this panel. And so thank you to UCSF for, I mean, thank y'all for bringing it together. And I want to leave y'all with a brief story, which is just to say, you know, I first got to the Ella Baker Center. We were faced with a youth prison system that was awful, that families were traveling hundreds of miles just to see their kids, only to be told they couldn't visit because they had on the wrong color pair of pants, or because their kids' entire living unit was on lockdown for weeks and sometimes months on end. There were a string of deaths inside of these youth prisons, of young people, and mothers and grandmothers. That next woman got together and said, we want to shut these youth prisons down. And this was at the turn of the century, into this century. And so, you know, there's moms and grandmothers who have been called the welfare queens. Their kids have been called the youth super predators, but they organize and we organize. And over a decade-long campaign, we were able to close 5 of 8 youth prisons across the state of California. And youth crime continued to decline during that same period. So this was not just a win for human rights, but also a win for public safety. And just last year, the governor announced plans to close the last 3 youth prisons. And at the Ella Baker Center, we're building out with Restore Oakland our vision of what public safety and youth justice really looks like. It's an 18,000 square foot building. It's grounded in restorative and transformative justice. We're trying to learn from our indigenous brothers and sisters. We're trying to around the world who have really led with holding people accountable and yet still holding them in community. So if I had thought, I would not have thought that how far we've come on that issue was possible 20 years ago. And yet here we are. And so I think that things are possible when we come together, when we get organized, as Eli said. Don't just join one organization, join multiple ones, because there are multiple, there's a multiplicity of work that needs to be done. So thank you.
Thank you. Monique?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to say, if you're an ally, listen, listen, trust lived experience. And that goes for Black folks who are not trans, or who are cisgendered, who are, you know, hetero, straight, whatever, identified. Listen, find out, research, read, do your work. We all have a lot of unpacking to do to answer to what Kai is saying, you know. And the answer, I think, to your question, Kai, is why do we become the oppressor? You know, and we go back to our restorative justice work on this one, and I think you know this one, right? Hurt people hurt people. Healing people heal people. So that when we're healing, you know, we give anti-Blackness back to folks who are dealing in anti-Blackness, right? We focus on positive Blackness. We focus on love. We focus on joy. We focus on happiness. We give it back. Anything that is not about positivity, that is not about strength, that is not about all these stories, we give it back. We focus on loving ourselves, loving our community, feeling joyful and being together in village, and drumming and singing and dancing and talking and hugging and loving. You know, that's what we take back on. And if folks want to join us, and they can join us because they've listened, they understand the protocol, they're not coming in to rescue, they're not coming in to fix, they're not coming into with the I know better than you do feeling, they're just coming to be loved and love. And that they remember that love in public, is what Cornel West said, is justice. So if everywhere that we don't have justice is where we need to root out and love more, including love ourselves.
Thank you so much, Monique, and thanks to all of the panelists. This has, again, been an honor and a privilege to sit in conversation with you, and you've certainly given me, and I'm guessing our entire audience, a lot to think about, which we should be. That's part of the work. I want to see if Lamisha had any additional closing comments before we wrap up.
I just want to thank you all and know that, thank you, Melissa, for posting again that the recording will be made available. We know that folks got to transition over to their 1 o'clock hour, but please know that the conversation doesn't stop here. Please really absorb and take in and take personal accountability and personal action in identifying your next step to contribute to change and justice. So thank you all. And thank you, Tsahai, for leading such a wonderful event. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Kai. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Zach, Melissa, Dorothy, everybody. Much, much, much appreciation. You all have a blessed and beautiful day.
Thank you.